The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to ask you to give me a few minutes while we wait for one or two of our other partners to join, and then I'll hand you over to Gerard. Thanks very much.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the X3 demo that we're going to present on the manufacturing vertical specifically. Today with me, I've got two of our colleagues, Grant Ball, which is an expert in the pre-sales team, and with him is Armand van der Merwe, our director for pre-sales specifically on X3. So it's quite exciting times because the last time, I don't know who of the business partners attended the SageX sessions throughout Durban, Cape Town, and Gauteng. But in these sessions, we basically said to you that we would like to deep dive the functionality of X3, specifically within the manufacturing, distribution, and then financial verticals. So a lot of you said, yes, you would like to see the product. Some of you told me that you haven't seen the product for the past 4 years, and which again gives us the opportunity that you can see the latest and greatest features of X3. Moving on to that is, I think, also what's important of the series of sessions we're going to be having. So today, Valentine's Day, we're having the manufacturing session. Then on the 18th, we're going to have the distribution deep dive. And then on the 21st, we're going to have the financials one. I think very important, if you want to register for those sessions, please log on to the Partner Hub and you can register for those sessions. Grant and Armand will be presenting all three of these sessions. And obviously, I think what's very important, as we go through the presentation today, if you do have questions, please pop them on the chat. Armand will monitor the chat, and at the end, we will specifically then address those questions that you do have. If you want to sign up as an X3 business partner, please make sure that you get in contact with us, and we'll assist you in getting the ball rolling for that. Why are we showing X3 to everyone? We said at the Sage sessions, what's very important is our customer focus. So if you have a customer that's got a complex environment within manufacturing, what is the longevity for that customer on the current products, and where do we want to take this customer to? And that's part of the reason why we're introducing these series of sessions. I really do hope that you enjoy it. I'm going to hand over to Grant. Grant, thanks for all the preparation and hard work behind this. And yes, it's a go.
Thank you, Gerard. Good morning, everybody. My name is Grant, pre-sales at Sage for X3. Today's session is not a training session. We've got an hour. There's a lot of functionality within the manufacturing module. So my purpose for today is to illustrate to you what some of the capabilities are, and hopefully as I'm going through the session, you're already identifying some of your customers that can benefit from this functionality that's sitting inside of X3 as core standard functionality. So let's just log in. Username, password. I'm currently running on version 12 of X3. We're presented with a visual process. And what I've done for today's session, I've designed a visual process for us to navigate through instead of navigating through the menu structure as you see over here. So if we go down to the manufacturing module, we can see inside the manufacturing module are all of the screens that are relevant within the module. But instead of navigating through the actual menu structure, I've created a visual process from which we're going to navigate. Before we get there, let's just have a look at some of the settings that we've got within the manufacturing module. So we've got parameter values. And inside the parameter values screen, we're able to define a set of business rules for the manufacturing module specifically, either for the entire X3 folder. In other words, all of the companies that reside inside of the folder will have the same business rules. We can define these by legislation, whereby the different legislations have different rules. We can also define it by company, which we don't see here because it hasn't been defined by company. And then we can define manufacturing business rules by site, meaning that within the different sites, we can have a different set of rules. So, for example, if we have a look at the NA021 site, and we click on the details for the production tracking controls, we can see that for this manufacturing module and this site, that all the employees are required to clock in and clock out. Whereas in other sites, they may not be required to clock in and clock out. So what this means is that by folder, by legislation, by company, and by site, we can have different sets of parameters or define the parameters for each of the modules. We can see we're focusing on the manufacturing module today, but there are the other modules as well. Just jumping through back to the navigation page just to show you what we've got over here. Under common data, which is where all the master files are maintained, if we just scroll down, you'll see there's different sections. We've got product tables, then there's manufacturing tables. And if we have a look at the employees, these are the employees that are sitting on the manufacturing floor. So in other words, the employees that are clocking in and clocking out. And what we can see over here with John Drake is that John Drake's employee ID is 500. His labor rate per hour is 450 Rand. He belongs to the day shift, and John Drake works at Labor Center or Work Center LAB 001. Now this becomes important when we start doing production tracking. In other words, what time did the job start? What time were there any breaks within the job? What time did the job end? Because what we want to do is capture the actual labor times for a job so that we can get actual labor rates writing through to our parent product. And not just relying on the standard labor rates and the standard setups that we have in our bills of materials and routings. A lot of companies just accept the fact that, you know, when they do production tracking, they're just accepting the standards. However, if you have manufacturing companies that would like to track their actual costs of production, we would use the shop floor control module, which we'll see a little bit later. But just keep in mind that there is always an employee that's clocking in and clocking out on jobs in order to track those times, and then there's always a labor rate for that employee. Let's go have a look at the product master. So in today's session, we're going to be manufacturing a bicycle. Within the product master, when we start defining these items, what we're able to do is link these items to a product category. And inside of the product category, the majority of the parameters can be defined to dictate how that category will behave within the system. So this is the category finished products. And if we scroll down, we can see that this particular product is not a bought item. We don't go buy it, we actually manufacture it. We have multiple reporting groups for that manufactured item. It's a managed item, not a service item. In other words, not a non-managed item. There's no lot tracking on this particular item. there is no serial tracking on this particular item. But if we do define any of these, you'll see that when I click on lot management, I'm then able to identify what type of traceability we require. And if we select detailed traceability, what that means is that we're able to see from this finished product what components were used in the product and who we sourced those components from, so that if there are any product recalls, we know who our suppliers were, and then we also know from an upstream perspective who we sold those products to. So we can do that product recall, we know which customers that we sold them to. So that's detailed traceability for lot and serial management. Just scrolling down a little bit further, we can also define quality control checks on items. Version management. Now what version management does, instead of having multiple records of the same stock code to cater for the different variations of that stock code, with version management, we have one stock code and we use the major version sequence and the minor version sequence to differentiate the different variants and options of that product. So a good example of what a major version would be, so this is SageX3 version 12, and the minor version could be the patch level, which is patch 20. Location management for the particular item, so we can define which warehouse and which location this particular product sits. Scrolling down, we can see we've got multiple units of measure, stocking unit of measure, purchasing unit of measure with a conversion back to the stocking, sales unit of measure with a conversion back to the stocking unit of measure. We keep scrolling down. What we get to see here is dimensions. So X3 is a dimensional ledger. It's not a structured GL or a segmented GL. We use these dimensions to actually start identifying what products we're selling, who we're selling them to, in which regions, which territories. And if we go through to the, we go back out of the category, you can see all the parameters defined in the category. That means that once you've linked the category to a product, the product inherits all of the parameters that are sitting in the category. We're then able to change them when needed within the product. So perhaps, yes, this product is a managed item in one site, but in another site it might be different. So we can link those products to the different sites in which these products can move, can be sold, can be manufactured or purchased. And then again, within the product site screen, we're then able to reconfigure the parameters for this particular product in this particular site. So in other words, in this particular site, we're not doing annual counts, we might be doing cycle counts. But in the other sites, they're doing annual counts. So again, you can see that the system is extremely flexible, that allows us to then change the parameters at the different levels of the actual products. And this type of functionality and flexibility and scalability is available throughout the entire module. So let's have a look now at this particular product's bill of material. So while we're inside, let's just jump out of here. Let's go back to the product. So we're jumping out of the product side screen. Let's go back to the product master. And if we scroll down to the manufacturing BOM, we're able to see the components that make up this particular product. So scrolling down, these are all the components. You can see that we've got a semi-finished product and another semi-finished product, which means that we need to make these products as well as buy all of the other components in order to make our bike. And we can see if we scroll across what the BOM quantities are, and if we're using version control, what the major and minor versions of those components are. If we have a look at the routing, so this is the work centers that are going to be used for this particular production. And if we scroll down, what we can see over here is labor work centers. And if we drill into these labor work centers, what we can now see is that we can define the costs of the labor at these work centers. So in other words, this is a labor work center. Its costing dimensions then define what the costs are for the setup at this work center, what the runtime costs are. So these are the labor costs that are defined against the work centers. And we're also then able to identify what the overhead recovery should be for this particular work center. So perhaps this work center uses electricity, gas, water, and these types of overheads, factory overheads, we need to recover. What we're then able to do is put those costs inside of the actual labor work center as the overhead recoveries, so that when the cost of production rolls up, we're able to pick up the material cost, the labor cost, as well as the overhead costs, and roll those up into the cost of the parent product that we're manufacturing. Just jumping out of the screen here. Let's go have a look at some weighing scales. So within X3, for food and bev, for pharma or pharmaceutical, what we're able to do is do weighing at or during the production process using the weighing scales. And what I'm showing you over here is just one of the setup screens that we have for the weighing scales, where we can define the calibrations. We can also define what the weighing is, what the unit of measure for weighing is, what the maximum, minimum, and the tolerances are for that particular weighing scale. And then we also have a product configurator. So in today's presentation, we're going to be building our bike using the product configurator. So this is to cater for situations where you have a client who has got, they manufacture something. So let's just say it would be a boiler room. And there are so many options and variants and configurations of a boiler room that it would be almost impossible to create a bill of material for each option. You could do that, but the maintenance of those bills of materials will be huge. Let's just say there's 5,000 bills of material or 5,000 different ways that we can configure a boiler room. That means we need to define 5,000 bills of material. Now, with the product configurator, what we can do, though, is start building up the structure of that boiler room to say, okay, we're going to make a boiler room. Well, what type of boiler room is it? It's a gas boiler room. Well, therefore, if it's a gas boiler room, what you need is these components. And then as you start selecting those components, it's to say, well, if you need that component, then you need these components. Which one of these components do you need? And that's what we call a product configurator. So I created a very simplistic example of that using the bike. And this is just the setup screen, just to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing over here. So if we just scroll down, we can see that these are all of the different components or elements that we can see on a bike. Is it aluminium? What type of gearing is it? And then scrolling down, we can see what types of kits we're going to be building as that configurator gets designed. What are the options? We can have different options for saddles. And then all of the components that are required to make the different types of bikes. So you'll see that very shortly. So let's go to our manufacturing visual process. And let's start with demand. So we have the ability to enter demand. Now, for this particular site, for this particular product, for this particular year and month, these are the demands in the weekly buckets. And what MRP will do, it will look at these demands within these weeks and then start proposing work orders to meet this demand. It will also start proposing purchase orders to purchase the components that are required to make these products. So from a demand perspective, we've got demand forecasts, and then there's also the direct demand that are sitting inside of the sales orders. So when we run MRP, MRP will look at the sales orders, the current demand, plus forecasted demand, and then propose work orders and purchase orders to fulfill that demand. So let's open up a sales order. And what we're going to be doing now is creating a sales order for our bike. And we're going to be building the bike on the fly using the product configurator. We're defining which site we're selling, which customer we're selling to. So I can type first couple of letters of the guy's name. And if we go to the lines tab, without entering a product code, what we can do is activate the product configurator. The product configurator asks us, right, what are you building? I'm going to build a bike. Okay, in that case, tell me what type of a bike is it? Is it a road bike or a mountain bike? We're going to build a mountain bike. What type of mountain bike? What is the size of this? We're going to build an adult mountain bike. And what material are we going to use? We're going to be using aluminium. When we click OK, it still shows us pre-built bills of materials for these bikes. Now, in situations where there isn't a bill of material already defined, what the product configurator will do is build that bill of material for you on the fly. So we select the product, and that product is now entered into our sales order. So we create our sales order. Now this is the demand that MRP is going to look at to propose the work orders and purchase orders to fulfill this demand. What we can do on the sales order is actually create the work order directly. So you'll see over there, there's an option for work order. I can click on that button and the system will create a work order based on the product that's been defined in the sales order. And that then means that the product that I build with that work order will be allocated specifically to this sales order, meaning that nobody else can pick that bicycle once it's been manufactured to fulfill another order, because that bike is dedicated to this sales order. But instead of me creating the work order directly from the sales order, what I'd rather do is to run MRP. So when we run MRP is obviously a very complex calculation, but the screen is very simple. We're just going to define what site we're running the MRP for. MRP runs, looks at the forecasted demand, the actual demand in the sales orders, and spits out a log at the end of it all to show us all the calculations that it's done. It's not going to give us any data in here, what work orders and what purchase orders suggested. We're going to be using another screen for that. So what we could do at this point in time is have a look at the enterprise planning workbench to see what work orders MRP has proposed for our bike that we have entered on our sales order. And what we can see here, that sales order that we entered has been the demand for this work order over here, and it's suggesting that we create a work order for that bike. But because this item is a multi-level item, in other words, it's got two other sub-assemblies built into it, what I'd rather do is have a look at the multi-level planning screen that will show me all of the subcomponents as well as all of the components that are required to make this bicycle. So if we go to multi-level planning, and we type in our bike, and we tell the system when we want to start planning to build this bike, X3 is now going to present to us all of the semi-finished products, so SFI. We need to build the wheel mounting. We also need to build the frame. And then all these BMS items are the components that need to be purchased. So you see there's a work order proposal, and then there's a purchase order proposal. So what we can do from the multi-planning workbench is actually generate all of these work orders. So there's going to be a work order for our bike, a work order for our wheel assembly, and a work order for the frame. And then purchase orders for the components. So when we click on the generate button, the system's going to automatically generate those transactions for us. At the end of this process, it's going to generate a log that's going to show us the purchase order numbers or the purchase requisition numbers and the work order numbers that have been generated for this particular bike. And there we can see we've got work order number 24, 25, and 26. So the one work order will be for the full bike, the other two will be for the wheel assembly and for the frame. And when we scroll down on this audit log, what we can see is that the system has now created purchase requisitions. There is a parameter that allows you to define whether you want to create a purchase requisition or a purchase order from the planning, from the multi-level planning. In this situation, it's created purchase requisitions because I want to show you a bit of the workflow. So let's just open up our MAD in the meantime. If we go to work order number 24, let's just have a look what that looks like. Let's just jump out of here. We go back to our visual process. We can navigate through to a work order. And then using the left list, we can search for our work order just by typing in the work order number and pressing tab. And there we go. So keeping in mind that this work order was automatically generated by the system. So let's have a look what a work order screen would look like. We've got our parent product that we're manufacturing, how much we're manufacturing. And when we scroll down, we can see all of the components and their quantities that are required to make that bike. We scroll down a little bit further, we can see the work centers that are going to be used to assemble that bike. Having a look at the requisitions that were generated, if we go to material planning, using our visual process, we navigate to purchase requisitions. One of the purchase requisitions numbers was number 46. So there it is over there. We can see that this particular requisition is for the rim. We need two of those, obviously one for the back, one for the front. And what we can do one by one as the buyer, the planner, is have a look at these, have a look at the supplier that's been proposed to be used for this purchase, and then generate the order automatically from the requisition by clicking on the order button. And what we can see there is the purchase order that was generated from that requisition, purchase order number 59. So directly from the purchase requisition, we can go and view that purchase order by clicking on View Purchase Requisition Orders. And again, from the screen, we can then drill in to that purchase order. Now this drill down, drill up, drill down that I'm showing you is available throughout the entire system, meaning that if you are on a purchase requisition and that purchase requisition was converted to a purchase order and that purchase order was received and that receipt was matched to an invoice and that invoice generated a journal entry in the GL, from the purchase requisition, you can actually drill through the entire life cycle of that requisition up into the GL and view each of the transactions from within the purchase requisition screen. And if in the GL, you can drill all the way down to the first transaction that created a financial record, which would have been the purchase order receipt. So again, looking at the purchase order, you can see that we're going to be ordering 2 of these rims from our supplier. What could also happen is workflow triggers. So for those items where they require a workflow approval before the purchase requisition can be converted to an order, what we can see here is that we can define workflow triggers that will automatically fire off an email to the approvers to approve that requisition, and only once it's been approved can it be converted to an order. And this is just an example of a purchase requisition that has been sent for approval. What we can see here is that we've got the requisition number, who created it, what company and what site they belong to, the amount and the GL entries that will be affected by this transaction. And as an approver with your email, you can use your mobile device, tablet, phone, whatever it might be, and directly from the email, approve that requisition by clicking on that link, reject the requisition by clicking on that link, or if you needed more information because there wasn't enough information in the email, what you can do from your mobile device is click on the bottom link, which then logs you into X3. I'm already logged in, so it's not asking me for my login name and password. It logs you into X3 and it takes you directly through the transaction that requires your approval. Here we are, there's the requisition. And before approving, we may want to check if there's enough budget available. So we can then have a look at the budget screen. X3 uses commitment accounting or encumbrance accounting, whereby it has a look at all of the commitments and pre-commitments, in other words, the purchase orders and purchase requisitions that are sitting in the system that haven't yet generated expense, but when they do, they'll consume budget. And it adds up the actual budget spent so far, the purchase orders that are waiting, the purchase requisitions that are waiting, adds the 3 of them up together to give you an actual budget consumption versus what the budget amount is. There are business parameters that control how the budget check will be managed. If the budget has been exceeded, we can prevent the user from creating the requisition using the business parameter, or we can allow it to go through workflow and let the approver decide whether to exceed budget or not. So once you're available, or once you're ready to sign this, you're inside the system now, you can use the signature option on the top of that to approve that requisition. And once approved, it will make the order button that you can see that's been grayed out over here active. In other words, people can then convert that requisition to an order. Okay, so we have created our work orders. We've created our, we've converted our requisitions to purchase orders. Within the material requirement visual process, we can see that we can receive those orders. And if there's any quality control checks that have been flagged on those products that we received, we'd do quality control checks on those using quality control sheets. And only once they have been quality controlled and approved, will those products now be ready for picking so that we can pick it for the manufacturing process. Let's go back to our manufacturing process now. So from a production tracking perspective, in other words, we've issued our raw materials to our shop floor. We have built this bicycle, we've pulled all the components, we've made our frame, we've made our wheel assemblies. What we need to do is do production tracking. Now there's a number of ways that we can do that. We can open up the production tracking screen. we would enter the site for which we're doing the production tracking and the order that we're tracking. Let's take that one over there. And then what we're able to do within the tracking screen is to define what operations were actually used. You'll see that there's the option to enter the actual work center that was used during the production process. Now, this is relevant because each work center has a different number of laborers. Each work center may have a different overhead recovery amount or a different labor rate assigned to it. So if perhaps a work center was down, maybe there was a fault on the machinery, and we needed to use another work center, we could then actually enter the actual work center that was used so that we can get that work center's labor rates run into our costing of the particular product. You also see that we have the ability to enter the actual quantities that were made, the actual rejected quantities, the actual times that were used to make these products, run times, setup times. Now, this particular screen requires us to enter these values manually, but using shop floor control, which you'll see shortly, you're able to automatically have those values written into these screens. We'll see that shortly. So from an operations perspective, when we're doing production tracking, we can define which work centers were used, what the actual run times were, how much of the product that we were meant to manufacture did we manufacture, you can see over there, and then what components that we're supposed to use, how many of each of the components did we actually use. So once production tracking has been done, the cost of production for that particular item is then accumulated. Now, if we wanted to use production tracking terminals, so terminals at the work center, so touchscreens, we have that ability using the production tracking terminals. You'll see it's a more simplified screen. We can use barcoding, so in other words, we can barcode our job sheets, where the user at the work center would scan the barcode on the job sheet. It will then bring up the product, the location, the lot numbers, and they can just enter the quantities that they've produced on their touch screens. If we look at shop floor control, so this is clocking in and clocking out. So we go use our employee 500 and we clock in, clock out. You'll see there's the clock in time and the clock out time. And if we have a look at the work orders that have been assigned to this user, we would then select the work order and we would click on Start Setup. In other words, we're going to do the setup of this machine or the setup of this particular job. And when we click Start Setup, it actually writes the time of the starting through to the production tracking screen. And then as we're progressing through the day, we might want to cancel the labor, the start times. So let's just click on Start, and then we go over here, and we can have a break, so a coffee break. And when we click on break, the system will stop this particular job card. It will start tracking the time now from the start to the stop. And if there are a number of stops in the tracking process, indirect stops, so like maybe a toilet break, it then accumulates all of the times that the user started and stopped the job to get the actual time taken to produce this particular work order. And then it writes those times through to the production tracking screen that we've just seen so that we don't need to enter those manually. You'll see there's also quality control. So once we've manufactured our bike, do we send it through to quality inspection? In other words, that particular bike will not be available for picking until the quality control inspection has been performed and that particular product has passed the quality control. And only at that point in time will that bicycle be made available for picking. In other words, we can then ship that sales order to the customer because that bike has been quality controlled. And then from a financial perspective, we want to close that work order. We want to do WIP finalization. In other words, if there's any production variances that are, maybe we send some products through to the workflow that we didn't use and there's some variances in labor, manufacturing, the variances are calculated in the WIP finalization and those variances are then posted through to the GL. Once the work order has been finalized, we're then able to go and ship the product. So in other words, we've made our bicycle, we've quality control checked it, we're now able to ship that invoice to our customer. And then from a reporting perspective, I've just entered some of the reports and inquiries that are available once we within the manufacturing module. Let's just focus on the WIP cost inquiry. Okay, the WIP cost inquiry screen will show us that for this particular work order, how much we plan to produce, how much quantity was rejected, how much quantity was completed, and how much quantity is remaining. We can see when we started the job, ended the job, and when we scroll down, we start to see a breakdown of the costs that were accumulated for material, labor, and overhead. And if there's any machine costs or subcontracting costs included in that manufacture, they'll all be added together to give us the total cost of manufacture for this particular item. We scroll down a little bit further, we can then see a breakdown. So we can see the product, what product we made, how many we made, what the amount or the cost was, if it's been posted to the GL or not, if there's any adjustments, overhead costs. We scroll down to the material, we can see all of the components that were used to make this product with their associated cost and quantity. We can also see the labor that was expensed for this particular job, and then any machine costs and subcontracting costs, as well as overhead. So the WIP cost inquiry screen will give us a breakdown of all the costs that were accumulated during our manufacturing process. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you have got a better overview of what our manufacturing module can do. Obviously, there is a lot more. We don't have all the time in the world today, but I hope today's session has given you a bit of overview of what the manufacturing module is capable of doing.
Great. Thanks so much, Grant. Guys, we haven't received any questions, but feel free to post them. Otherwise, you're very welcome to send them through on an email or to me personally, and we'll collate an FAQ doc that we'll share with you, as well as this recording in the next couple of days. So thank you very much. I think you all get 20 minutes of your lives back on Valentine's Day. Make it count. But thanks for joining us, everyone. Cheers.